Hi everyone! This week I decided to try making something from a book in my collection that I've never used before. The Bouchon Bakery is a bakery in California that I've never been to, but I've heard a lot about. This book is stunning. The pictures are absolutely gorgeous and make me want to try everything in this book. But it's also enormous. It is so large that I actually wonder if they've ever intended anyone to actually use the book to make the recipes. Well, I'm gonna try and take up that challenge. It's starting to turn chilly here, and when I think of fall flavors, I think of cinnamon. So this week I picked the Cinnamon Honey Scones. This recipe looks fairly simple, and it seems like a good place to start when exploring recipes from this new book. So come bake with me.
First, we're going to cut up our butter into cubes. I like to do this with a bench scraper, so it makes it pretty easy. For our honey cinnamon butter, we start off with flour. Sure, of course we do. Now we're going to whisk to combine our flour, cinnamon, and sugar. Slightly too aggressively whisking there. Alright, now we're going to put in our butter, and he says to use your fingertips, but if I do that, my nails will get all in the butter, so we're going to use a pastry cutter. Just be patient with it, you'll get there eventually. Mix in our honey, make this a cohesive ball. That was honestly easier than I expected. Alright, so now we're going to put this in some kind of square form. And now it's going in the freezer until tomorrow. With any pastry type recipe, the first thing we're going to do is cut up our butter into like 1/4 inch cubes, and that makes it easier to mix in later. I always do this first so that I can do it and then return them to the fridge so that they're as cold as possible when they go into the dough. Unlike having to remember to bring something to room temperature, I always remember to do this step. I like to work with the half sticks, but if you prefer full sticks, go for it. This is the butter cinnamon honey mixture we made yesterday and froze. And it does slice, so we're supposed to slice it up again into 1/4 inch cubes. It's a little bit bigger than 1/4 inch. It does slice, but it requires some pressure. You know what? This might do better with my pastry cutter. Oh yeah, that's easier. Use a pastry cutter. It's actually quite satisfying. Alright, back in the freezer, these cubes will go. We're going to start with our dry ingredients. Flour, still flour, a little bit more flour, cake flour, more cake flour, and then another measurement of cake flour, baking powder. I think by the end of this I will have used every single measuring spoon. More baking powder, baking soda, sugar. Alright, we're just going to mix this to combine it, and then we'll start adding in our wet ingredients. Scrape that down a little bit. Start with our butter that we broke into pieces earlier. Alright, that looks decent. Most of our butter is broken into smaller chunks now. I'm gonna, with the mixer running, add the heavy cream and then the, well, sour cream. Recipe calls for creme fraiche, but I don't have creme fraiche and I couldn't find any at the store and I didn't want to take 24 hours to make it, so I'm using sour cream. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough. that's our dough ball. Now we're going to go over to our work surface and incorporate in the honey cinnamon sugar butter thing we made yesterday. All right, we're gonna mix in our butter, cinnamon, honey, sugar cubes by hand. Dough is pretty sticky, but not too difficult to work with. All right. The recipe says to put it between 2 bits of plastic wrap and then form it into a square. I've never had great success doing this, but we're gonna give it a shot. We're looking for a 7 by 10 inch square, and I love this mat because it gives me inches. So I center it here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. Oh, we're basically there that way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so we're going out to about this red ring spot. Kind of make it be square so that when it comes time to roll it out, it'll roll evenly. At least that's the hope. I have to say, I do like doing the 2 pieces of plastic wrap because then it's not getting all over my hands, because I hate getting my hands sticky. It's a weird problem for a baker to have. All right, now that's as good as I'm gonna get that. Into the fridge it goes for 2 hours. The dough's been in the fridge for about 2 hours, so now I'm gonna cut it. And truth be told, I picked this recipe specifically as my first recipe from this book because I've never used my little bicycle cutter thingy here before, and I wanted to try it. It's not the easiest thing to use. This is true. To the other side. At least gives me score marks to go back on. Well, that sort of worked. I'm going to use my pastry cutter to cut through the score marks that I made, because when I tried to push the bicycle-y thing, it just slid on my cutting board, and that wasn't very helpful. But at least this way they're all the same size. And all of these I'm going to combine and sort of squish together and make a new set. I gotta be honest, I'm not really sure what those 2 hours in the fridge did. It's kind of cold, but still very easily workable. And this one will just be sort of misfit shaped. Alright, now I need to wash my hands. The recipe says to cover in plastic wrap and then put in the freezer for at least 2 hours, preferably overnight. So overnight it is. No, recipe says to cover and put in the freezer for 2 hours or overnight. So I'm doing overnight, as it is 9:30. I'll see you in the morning. It is the next morning and we are going to bake these. I just pulled them straight out of the freezer and took off the plastic wrap. Very important, don't forget that step. And now we're going to put them in the oven. So now, while the scones are in the oven, we are going to make the glaze. But before we can make the glaze, we have to make the clarified butter. So we're going to make the clarified butter. It says to basically melt a pound of butter and then skim off the foamy bits. So that's what we're going to do. starting to get it to foam. I'm going to skim off the foam, but we want to be quick because we don't want it to toast. Oh, turn that down. Something tells me we're doing this just so the glaze will be clear. For the home baker, I really wonder how much this is strictly necessary. This made more than I expected. I need a bigger container. Well, at least it's super hot. He says to leave the milky white stuff behind, so we're doing that. There, fussy clarified butter. Alright, we have 4 minutes left on our scones, so we are going to make our glaze. So we're going to take our 3 tablespoons and 2 teaspoons. Why can there not just be 4 tablespoons of clarified butter, which I still maintain could probably just be regular butter. And we're going to squeeze in about a tablespoon of honey. That's about a tablespoon. We're going to melt them together. Which shouldn't take long as the butter is already melted. That looks melted to me. Now we just need the scones to come out of the oven, and we'll glaze them, and then they need to cool fully before we can actually eat them. Scones are done. They look good, a little melty. So now, before they cool, we're going to brush with our glaze. Yeah, I really am not sure that making clarified butter is strictly necessary for flavor, maybe for looks.
Here are my final thoughts. Usually, I don't like scones as much as muffins. I find them to be much drier and not as flavorful. But these scones are much lighter and fluffy with just a slightly crispy exterior that make them a lot more enjoyable for me than most scones that I've had. They are very flavorful, and the bursts of cinnamon and honey pockets provide a really nice contrast with the more savory dough. With that said, however, the recipe is very fussy. Several times you end up having to use odd amounts of ingredients, like 2 1/4 cups plus 2 tablespoons of cake flour. I know this is because they probably took the recipe they use in the actual bakery, that probably makes hundreds of scones, and did the math to pare it down, but really, for the home baker, it just ends up meaning that you have to wash most of your measuring cups and spoons. It also has multiple times that you have to rest or freeze the dough for at least 2 hours to overnight. So either you decide well in advance you want to make these, or you try to do it all in one day and it literally takes all day, and most of that time is just waiting. As I suspected, the size of this book is also a bit of a challenge. I have a small kitchen, and countertop space is limited. This is literally it. This book takes up a significant amount of that space, and I end up mostly leaving it on my dining room table, which is several steps away from the rest of the kitchen, and that's a bit annoying. So the final question is, would I make these again? Probably not. I might if I were hosting a brunch, but the odds of that seem small. I would recommend these to anyone who really, really likes scones and has the time to hang around or wait, or is super organized and willing to make these in advance of wanting to actually eat them. Also, it is nice to know that you can make the dough and freeze them for up to a month, and then you could just have a bag of them ready to go. So anytime you wanted a quick baked treat to go with your coffee, you have them in the freezer. And that's what I do with cookies. So I could see using this recipe in the same way if I had the extra freezer space, which I don't. If you made it to the end of this video, thanks so much for watching. Please consider liking this video, that really helps me out, and consider subscribing to follow along as I explore more relaxed baking. I'll see you next week.